So the first thing I'm going to do here, I don't want to write it out again, so I'm just going to copy and paste the exact same pool kind of thing here. And we're going to put that right here. So now I have this pool that I can query from. Again, make sure you are connected to whatever you called your database, right? Make sure your database is running. Make sure it has all the data that you expect. None of this is going to work until that works. Okay, here we're going to put the search functionality or list functionality, as it was aptly pointed out to me, since we're not actually filtering at all. Okay, then I'm going to say const rows equals pool await pool.query. And then here, I'm going to put this on multiple lines. If you use backticks in JavaScript, you can put things on multiple lines, and that can be helpful for me. Select distinct on recipe ID. I'll say r.recipe.id just to be extra specific. We're going to say r.recipe ID, r.title. We're going to coalesce rp.url to default.jpg as URL. Okay. From recipes are, we need to join, but we also need to include all recipes, not just ones that have images. So we're going to do a left join to include everything from the from table. We're going to left join from recipes photos rp on r.recipe ID equals rp.recipe ID. No parameters here because we're just listing everything in the database in this particular case. A useful thing to do later if you wanted to go and like expand your knowledge is you could do pagination on this. And then here I'm just going to say res.json rows, which is what came back here. And then we can get rid of all of this. Cool. Let's take a look, make sure I'm not out of my mind. So recipes, and I crashed it. What did I crash? This needs an extra, let's try that. I forgot a, oh no, that's not it, because that's what it's supposed to be. So let's actually see what I did wrong. Unterminated string, which is the default.jpg. That is actually what's wrong. So you make sure you have both of the single quotes there. Now let's try that again, and there you go. So see, these have photos, the ones that do, and you can see some of these have this like photo like that looks like this one. That is the default photo. Whatever. That's when your app just is giving up and it says whatever, I don't care. Let's hop into the get. So again, I broke this into two photos. I broke this into two queries, and that just made sense to me. But just like programming, and there's like a ton of ways to do the one thing. Same thing in SQL. There's a lot of different ways that you could have done this. You could have definitely done this in 3 queries, right? One to the recipe table, one to the recipe photos table, and one to the ingredients table. And I would have definitely accepted that as correct as well. Const ingredients promise equals pool.query. This is just how I like to code JavaScript. You don't have to do it the same way. You could definitely do an await here. But here I'm actually just going to grab the promise. And then I'm going to say select i.title as ingredient title, i.image as ingredient image, and i.type as ingredient type. I'm going to grab that from recipe ingredients ri, inner join. I like to put these extras like white space things just to let me know it's like I'm kind of starting like another little clause, right? Like you can basically think this is like a comma in my speech. Ingredients I on i.id equals ri ingredient id where ri.recipe id equals number 1. We've more or less already written this out together, right? But the idea here is we have the ingredients table. We're grabbing all of the various ingredients that exist for any one recipe based on what the recipe ID is. So here we're just going to give it the recipe ID. Okay, this is the first query that I chose to write. The second query that I'm going to choose to write is the photos one, const photos promise equals pool.query select r.title r.body. This is what I'm saying. This part could have been a third query where you just get the recipe details. I chose to put it together with the photos because that made sense to me. It's one query. It wasn't that hard to do. Here I'm going to say coalesce rp.url to default.jpg like we saw above as URL from recipes r. I can put that on a new line or not, either way. Here we're going to say left join, right? Because we want to grab all recipes no matter what. Or rather, this is like a single detail page. If there is no photos, we still want the recipe. That's what the left join means in this particular context. Recipes, photos, rp on rp.recipe id equals r.recipe id. And then lastly, we need our where r.recipe id equals $1. And then you need to give it the recipe ID as well. Okay, so now I have these two promises. Here's my thinking here. You can say await here and await here. The way that await works is it's going to pause execution until this happens. Then it's going to go here and it's going to pause execution until this happens. I actually want both of those queries to go out at the same time, right? Because it doesn't matter what order they come back to me in. And I want to pause and wait for both of them, right? Does that make sense? So you can do this with something called promise.all. This is just a JavaScript thing and how I would write this code. So I can say this is going to be photos response and then ingredients response equals promise.all, and you're just given an array of promises. So this will be photos promise and then ingredients promise. And then all I have to do here is I say await. So here's what's going to happen kind of in real time. It's going to call this, but it's not going to wait. It's going to immediately call this one as well. So two queries are going out like not simultaneously, but in quick order of execution, right? It's not going to wait to call photos promise for this one to complete. Here, when I say await promise.all, it's going to wait for both of these to finish. Once both of these have finished, then the execution will resume. Okay? And then now I have photos response here and ingredients response here. And I can just say const photos row equals photos response dot rows and const ingredients rows equals ingredients response dot rows, right? Then down here, res.json ingredients, and we're just going to give it ingredient rows. Photos. So if you remember here on the photo rows, if you look at the code here in the detail.js, it's expecting them to just be direct images, just URLs. It's going to give them back to you as objects. So I need to transform them. There's a couple ways you could totally do this. You could say for, and I'll just leave this. This might be the easiest way. Let I equal 0. I is less than photos rows dot length I plus plus. We'll just call this const photos equals blah. And we'll just say photos dot push photo rows I URL, right? So then this photos array will just be URLs, right? It's just going to be strings instead of objects. And then here I can just say photos, right? These photos that I created up here, or I can just say photos like that. Title in photos, rows, we can just grab the first one, right? And grab the title off of that because it's going to be the same for all of them. And same with body. It's going to be photos, rows, 0.body. But if you did a separate query for that, you would grab it out of the separate query. So if you're reading through my completed code, it's a little bit more clever in terms of how it does it, just because that's how I write code. I tried to be a little bit more explicit here as we wrote it together, but just to walk you through it really quick. Oh, I have it here as well. API for completed recipes. Here I do all the destructuring in one line. But notice it's grabbing photos rows and ingredients rows the same way. It's just doing a little bit more terse syntax. And then here, instead of doing like a for loop to grab all the URLs out, it does a map, which does exactly the same thing. Otherwise, exactly the same. So let's get rid of that and get rid of that. So now let's go look at our project. This still works okay. Let's look at cookies. We get butter, eggs, brown sugar, milk, sugar. And notice we're getting all of our photos down here, and all of the ingredients get put in here as well. So, works. Hopefully it's fairly demonstrative of this is really what it's like writing SQL code together with backend code. This is generally what it feels like.